And on top of that, if you are active and you're communicating with the DAO, you're empowered by time. So someone who takes the time to research and know what matters, when they stake or bond into express a preference behind a particular proposal, that's not just about how wealthy they are. There's an influence that comes from time. And so I would say you can build a little bit of a narrative around this, sharing some of the attributes that made people care about Moloch. At the same time, it fills a need for something that is less gated but still works. So our designs have enough formal considerations that we understand, for example, the way in which someone can or cannot just bond in and swing a vote. It's actually very hard. So the worry with something like Moloch is if someone could just bond whenever they want, join whenever they want in a large amount, and get a huge voting power, they could literally hop in last minute and swing a vote, kind of like what we saw with the Aragon whale who voted at the very end of that vote, right? You don't actually want that to happen, but you also don't want to fuck with the procedures of decision making too much. So having an organically designed system where that kind of last minute activity is either impossible or as expensive as fuck. And so in the token engineering commons design, it would actually be expensive as fuck, because you would have to bond the curve hard enough to move the market. And the bonding curve we've already shown, slippage gets real bad if you try to move the bonding curve by large of a percentage. So if you try to take
and the big thing is that if people see that you're trying to sway something and you do have enough money to do it, they have time to bail.
Exactly. So I was going to say that was the second half. So the first half of this is, again, because it comes through both mechanisms. The first half is that when you bond, if you try to take, in order to swing a vote, you would generally have to take a large fraction of the supply potentially. So you'd have to go in and bond enough to say, increase the supply by 5% or 10%, because that's how you would you would increase your power by that much, right? So first, that you would incur quite a bit of slippage from moving the market in that way, because the bonding curve imposes that on you. And on top of that, you don't get the immediate benefit of what you just bought. What you bought, even if you bring in a huge amount, still charges up over time. So between the resistance of the bonding curve pushing back on you and internalizing the externality of increasing the supply by 10%, and the fact that even though you have 10% of the supply, it only charges up over time, you're basically blocking without blocking the let me buy a ton of votes and swing an outcome. You're making it so that it's just if you try to do that, it's just going to explode in expensiveness. But technically the system isn't just it's not actually gated. It's just got organic counter pressure on the behavior that we don't want, which is the way that we scale beyond oligarchy to community, because there's going to be a highly heterogeneous behavior pattern. Some people are going to just buy votes to participate in something they care about. Some people are going to be long-term hodlers. There's going to be just a big mix. And we want to be able to...
I mean, there's a lot of similarities to proof of work, right? Because if you want to break a 51% sidechain or like Bitcoin, you have to get all this hardware to do it. And then once you do it, the theory would be that it would all of a sudden reduce in value. So why would you do that?
And to be clear, this comes from similar principles, because the whole proof of work correction is actually a control loop. That is, I mean, the proof of work, the fact that the Bitcoin.
Well, okay, so there's a bit of a delay, but I want to steer this into it's just but I want to steer this back into our the design question of what parameters can we settle on, and there's a lot of things that we can discuss that we can say, yes, this is something we can say up front. And then yes, actually that's something we want to test the design on and do simulations and see.
That whole thing there was part of this, because what I'm saying is that you should be able to say two groups of things. One group of things is the high-level architecture of the whole DAO, which is what I was just talking about. The GiveF plus conviction voting plus the augmented bonding curve with the sort of ... And I think it's important that we're also talking about exploring future designs for funneling funds into the pool that don't just come from the exit tax. So we could talk about, for example, our experiments with the notebook as a way of generating funds. We could potentially talk about the sort of so the discount token.
Yeah, Harburger tax.
The Harburger tax and the discount token are both representations of Commons funding sources that are ways of monetizing the byproducts of the Commons labor that can actually send money directly into the funding pool. Do you see what I mean? But that's not MVP isn't going to have those there, but the bigger architecture says the Commons stack will be able to produce things that are revenue generating, and that through Harburger tax and through things like the discount token, which I struggle, I don't think that's the best name, to be honest with you, is it's essentially a co-op SaaS model. So if you reread that paper, I actually designed it for, Sweetbridge called it the discount token. I designed it to be essentially, it does discount things, but it's really designed to be a co-op SaaS. So if you look at it carefully, we might even make sense for someone to reframe and write a Medium article about reframing it as co-op SaaS and just taking the sort of math and the diagrams out and representing them. So those are things that are important precisely because they can funnel revenue into the funding pool, not that in a continuous way as a result of the product of the Commons labor, not just through the bonding curve. Because if the bonding curve is the only source of revenue, people are going to be like, it makes sense that it's the bootstrap source, but it is not the ultimate only source. So we have this design now that has 3 core components at MVP, which are the augmented bonding curve with the funding pool, and then the conviction voting, which provides a valve for flowing funds from the general funding pool into specific milestones, and then GiveF sort of integration for actually signing off on milestones and dispersing funds. Right? That's the core design. And the argument is that system will be able to produce things that are valuable enough that through some variations of Harburger tax and or discount token style models, we will actually be able to generate Commons funds directly back into the funding pool to fund future work. So that's
obviously we can give them. Obviously, we can talk about all of this, like what we're doing from a high level. But I really want to get.
Let me finish. I'm going to get to where you want to go, I think. So all of that as the high level architecture, both at launch and future for it. Then you zoom in and you say, all right, what are the first steps? That zooms you in on the augmented bonding curve and brings you to specific discussion of the augmented bonding curve design, which is probably the most mature of all of the parts, and our analysis of the parameters for the hatch sale. But what I'm basically saying is that the justification for focusing on that and those parameters is derived from this. This is the high level design. This is why and what it is that we're making and why it's valuable. And then you can step down and say, and how are we going to make this happen? Focus level 1, augmented bonding curve. How does that work? Hatch sale. Hatch sale, here's the analysis. Here are the parameter choices. But I'm arguing that the justification for focusing on the sale is derived from this high-level design specification, which again, it's not a low-level component specification. We're only providing the component specification for the augmented bonding curve. But we're basically saying, big picture design, specific component focus, parameter choices for the hatch sale.
Yeah, definitely the hatch sale is what most people care about the most. The other thing is the KPI. Well, sorry, not the KPI, but the vesting factor is going to be a huge thing that people would care about. I assume that's something that we would leave for design, but
We probably need to do two things with that. We probably need to leave it at design, but we should also be able to speak to it at the level of, about how long you should be able to like you should be able to have, business requirement level saying like, hey, like we haven't exactly chosen precise KPI implementations, but we're targeting roughly this time scale. Like give them the answers to the questions that people actually have. Like about how fast will this happen? Well, we haven't decided exactly what the KPIs are, but when we tune them, we're going to tune them to approximately this time scale. You see what I mean?
I mean, but that's. I mean, do you think that you can tune a vesting schedule to a time scale? Because, like, I mean, that relies on how well these guys.
Not to an exact, but we're talking about orders of magnitude. People are going to care about whether it's weeks, months, or years. So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that we can tune it to a scale. We can't tune it to an exact value. We aren't saying the vesting schedule will be X weeks, because it's only going to be X weeks if we program it to be X weeks. If we want it to be adaptive, then what we can do is say it in epoch. Like in the sense, we will tune it to scale days, scale weeks, scale months, scale years. That's not the same as saying we can predict exactly, how many weeks it's going to be or how many months it's going to be. But I think that what people really care about is like what order they're facing. And I think that it's reasonable for us.
Yeah, for sure. But
I mean, but
you do, okay, because that seems so challenging, right? Like, how do we predict how many people are going to buy into this token bonding curve and what the volatility is going to be, so that and getting on second exchanges and like all these things, the goal here is they have to spend
so then
money, right?
Because I mean, like your point is well taken, and it depends on how, like again, it kind of depends on how tightly we sort of prescribe, because we have an explicit trade-off between like there's a continuum from completely prescriptive where you schedule it to completely free where it happens entirely due to measurement of a thing that we can't control. But what I'm saying is that there's a continuum between those two things, and that
so we might integrate time into the KPI.
Yeah, I was under the impression that we would need to, because we would need to be able to set some expectations. So I guess maybe that's what we're getting at. I'm suggesting that it's mixed precisely because we'll have a problem if we can't communicate at all. So I don't know where on that continuum. If we say this, tuning is about finding a solution that is somewhere in the middle of that continuum. So so that we have like a little bit of predictability in time, even as we sort of try to have it be driven by adoption. But you can sort of see how the end points are scheduled vesting in time on one end and entirely KPI-based vesting on the other end. We could actually parameterize it between the two. So we could have an amount of vesting that occurs from time that's pretty slow, but still happens, and an amount of vesting that occurs as a function of the KPI, and we can mix them. And that way we have something where it will actually still vest faster if the KPI takes off, but it'll still have a minimum vesting rate in time. You see what I'm saying? So that's what I was thinking. So I don't have a problem with doing that, because if it's a percent, then they mix just fine. You can say, well, I vest X percent really slowly as time goes on, and I vest so many percent per KPI. So eventually, even if the KPI doesn't move, you'll vest everything, but it'll be at the minimum time scale. And if the KPI takes off, you'll vest much faster. So I'm actually thinking that the way we would communicate this is by using the bound. So we would say that okay, the slowest it could possibly vest is this time bounded part, but it will vest faster if it takes off.
Mm-hmm. So okay. So I'm curious of what kind of can we brainstorm that scale right now?
Yeah, I mean, because I view this as something I would sort of somewhat drive by what we think the expectations are. So I would prefer that the time vesting be about as slow as you think the market will tolerate. I would prefer the time vesting to be not the main mode of vesting, but I understand that it needs to be there. So if we're saying that the market would tolerate, something like, so think of these in half-lives, just for the record. These are because they're vesting percentages. So if the half-life of the time-based vesting scale was N months, say, so I don't know how many, you can tell me, but I'm thinking that the half-life of the time-based vesting scale has to be at least N months, and I would almost prefer that it be years, but I don't think the market would tolerate that.
No. I think the half-life needs to be around 12 months.
Okay, so let's flag the half-life for the auto vesting. So this is the vesting that happens in time no matter what. But then we can try to tune the KPI based one so that we think that it's going to end up being closer to, say, like if we make a rough swag at how quickly we think this will get adopted based on other projects' adoption rates, then we would maybe get it so that with projected KPIs, the half-life falls to something like 3 months. It could actually be faster if the thing explodes. It could certainly be as little as every 12 months if it doesn't take off at all. But like, that's kind of where I'm thinking. Like, if we have good growth at
what are our KPIs?
So I'm thinking that the KPI, at least in my original brainstorming, had to do with funds allocated. So
yeah, exactly.
This because you always want the goal to be the real goal, and so the end of the funnel is the goal. So actually, cash paid out to, you know what I mean, like tokens dispersed for labor. So there's a little bit of a delay built into that because it won't start. Like the thing has to launch, proposals have to be made, proposals have to be accepted, and then the work has to be done. So there's a lag associated with that. So the KPI-based number isn't going to start to go until something makes it through the funnel. But the idea would be we want to motivate everyone in the ecosystem to get the full funnel to run. We don't want to sub-optimize. So I would put the KPI at even like literally the things that come out at the giveth end. So once
they are. Well, at least the way I imagine the implementation is that it's still XDAI. Like it doesn't go into the bonding curve until it is paid out to the person. And so that's when we would trigger the KPI.
The KPI would be DAI rebonded as a result of delivered milestones.
Yeah, exactly. And so now how would we set that? Would we say like, okay, the funding pool has $1 million in it. It needs to spend $2 million. It needs to have allocated fund $2 million or something like that.
A different X variable. So I'm defining both of these in terms of essentially in terms of half-life. So you had a half-life in time that we used to define the drip for vesting in time. What we would say is we want a half-life. You want to, in terms of the X, the independent variable, DAI rebonded for completing milestones. So we would say something like you would vest half of your half would vest per, I don't know, $1 million DAI rebonded, or it doesn't have to be $1 million, but I'm saying like the X, the independent variable is DAI rebonded. So for completing milestones. So if you think it's 500,000, is it per $500,000 worth of DAI allocated? Is it per $10,000 of DAI allocated? Like you can pick the number, but the measure is in half-lives with the independent variable, time is swapped out for dollars of DAI rebonded. That's how you apply it.
And so then what we basically need to tell people, because I'm focused on narrative, right? I need to understand the foundation so I can answer questions, but we're focused on narrative. To tell people, we'll say that we're going to tune it so that there is a guaranteed half-life of around 12 months of liquidity, or so that you get your tokens back. And then that will be sped up if KPIs are achieved.
And just
and we don't have to even go more than that.
Just so that you understand, the way that I'm thinking about this is that if we pick this sort of half-life on the KPI side, so that in a way that's like, okay, we say that it's per $100,000 allocated for shits, then in order for us, if we say within a year that you would allocate half according to time, then if you you would essentially be accelerating by a factor of the KPI based half-life. So if you wanted it to be, I think I don't know if I can do this in my head, but I'm like, I think it's something like if you allocated $200,000 within that first three, like, so how much would go? I'm trying to think in my head how much would vest in 3 months it from the I can't do this in my head. I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, half-lives are hard to do in your head, dude.
Yeah,
like, come on.
Yeah, well, I mean, whatever. I can't do it in my head. I thought I could do it in my head. You have to make the numbers line up real nice to do it in your head. Point is, I was thinking about us being able to express in a chart or something an example where we said this line represents the vesting rate at, like, at minimal essentially at the KPI not moving. This is the floor, and then we can say this is what the vesting rate looks like if we allocate $100,000 in the first year. This is what the vesting rate looks like if we allocate $400,000 in the first. You see what I mean? So that you can just give people a visual that says, like, even though this is like combining half-lives, which is a little bit hard to do in your head, we would just make drawings of those curves.
Yeah. It would just be like Daplion's beautiful token bonding curve thing. And then it's just a web page.
Yeah. And I think this is exactly what we would want to do to explain this to people, because we don't even have to tell them much. We just have to basically be able to show them, look, the floor vesting rate is, here's the curve. And there's going to be
I think that we can leave a little mystery here, because in the end, I also want to make sure that we have space to develop the best fucking situation that we can. And I don't want to be too prescriptive. Like, I want to.
We're talking narrative here.
So if we just, I love this magic. Sorry.
I was just saying that, like, we're on the same page. I'm comfortable as long as you're just clear that the minimum narrative is there's a baseline that's automatic. There's a KPI-driven acceleration. This is what the KPI is. We will tune it as we sort of make progress. So, like, we're not saying the exact rate that it accelerates, but we're going to be clear about what it accelerates in. So this gives us the freedom that you want, because I'm not saying how much. We're saying the minimum and that it will be accelerated as a function of this measure. But we aren't saying how much we're accelerating it. That's our tuning parameter.
I mean, part of the selling point of what we're doing here is that we are going to do robust token engineering design, right? Like, if we can't do, and so it's really easy to be like, no, guys, I'm sorry. Like, you can't know how hot this pipe is going to be in the steam turbine build.
No, exactly.
Like, we'll figure that out.
The pipe is there. So what I'm trying to do is be very clear about the pipe and what goes in the pipe and what comes out the pipe, but tell them we're worrying about the pipe now. And so when I say this is the baseline, and then it will be faster because this pipe is an accelerator pipe, and we're saying that this accelerator pipe has 2 things that go into it. One is the baseline, and one is this KPI. And we're going to mix that to make the baseline go faster. We don't know how much faster yet. Just know that it's going to be mixed with this KPI, and it's going to go faster as a function of this KPI, but we will tune that based on our rigorous token engineering. You see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then the prices. So we can actually set a buy price and a sell price, right, for the token bonding curve?
Yeah, you can use the hatch sale analysis that I did with Abby. It's pretty robust. I literally already did the token engineering work precisely because, as you and I discussed, this was the critical path piece of token engineering required to drive this agenda. But obviously there's going to be a lot more.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we already did the analysis that we need to do some parameter selection. Obviously, if you want to do more analysis, we can always just open up that notebook and play around with some other numbers. Because what I did was a general analysis to educate. You can zoom in with that exact same notebook and play around with the numbers if you want.
Yeah. And are we going to pick any kind of vesting? Like, is there any other thing that we think we might want to prescribe in advance? I mean, one thing that I think is interesting, I don't think anyone will care, but for my own personal interest, is like how much it would take. Like, basically, I don't half-life's not the right word, but how much money needs to be put in where the experts have half the decision, half the tokens, right? Like, because depending on what the curve shape is, I think that would change. But like,
back this
it's
a little. Yeah, let me think about it. So the experts are the people who are bonding in the hatch.
yeah,
By definition, the experts are the people who are bonding in the hatch. So by definition, that means they will have all of the sway at launch.
yes. And then how much money needs to be put in so that they have half the sway?
Oh,
So,
gotcha. That actually should be a huge number because of the shape of the bond. We could add that. I think you just have to compute. So you have to basically compute the. So you know how actually this isn't going to be hard. It's because remember how this is defined as differentials. So you have to plug in 2 times the initial. If you have 2 times the initial supply, and then do the reserve as a function of supply, and then look at that. So
yeah, so when I can use DAP lines, I'm sharing my screen right now, and I can use DAP lines to say that it takes 54 million DAI to get the same number of tokens that these guys got for 3 million DAI. So yeah, like that, and like I think that will always change based off of
your choice of curve.
D naught, right? Like
whenever
your choice,
curve, you will get a different number because that, to your point, that is a function of how steep the curve is, and it's a function of where you in the curve is a function of your initial choices. So yeah, when you sweep the curve options, you will get different results for that. But I think it's a good analysis to do as long as you've sort of taken as a prior any particular curve, you will be able to compute that. So you could potentially pick a parameter like the initial raise size, and then look at that the doubling cost is a one-dimensional thing. So you could say, given how much we raise at the start, the doubling cost will be, and that's a line. You see what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting, right? And it also explains some of the governance power that is given to the hatchers. Although I don't necessarily, but then it kind of also goes against what you were saying about being incredibly inclusive, and well, not incredibly inclusive, but it's permissionless.
It's permissive. The word that I use is permissive, because what the system is not doing is preventing people. So yes, there's a reason why the people who are in it at the beginning have the voting power they do. They have it precisely because of their expertise, precisely because of their involvement in launching. This is how we reward the expert early adopters without denying access to others. So what's happening is the marginal cost of joining is going up, but no one is being stopped from doing it. As long as the market demands more influence, an elastic supply of influence is available. Do you see what I mean? So this is the difference between, it's parameterizing us between the oligarchy setting, which would be if we only allowed those people, and the perfectly democratic world, which we also don't want because it sucks at making decisions. So like, as much as people like the idea of the perfectly democratic world, it's also shit. So what we've done is essentially market parameterized that. We initialized the system in what is borderline oligarchy, but then we made it permissively expansive. So as long as you demand influence, you can get it. No one is going to stop you ever, but it's going to cost you more as the curve goes on. So that's one of the ways to think about it, is we've essentially allowed a market to parameterize the space between perfect democracy, which is shitty, and oligarchy, which is shitty.
Yeah. So okay. So I have another one for you, which is gets a little more. I think you might need to look at the document a little bit to understand what I'm going to say. So we're skipping down to the end because I'm still just playing with the hope that Jonathan comes, even though I never thought he would, but I don't know. Okay. Anyway, so number 2. So like it's basically the whitelist, right? So now that we can use the token engineering commons, we can actually guarantee that people how much money they can put into the token engineering commons. So one of the things that's interesting is that our multiplier that we're doing. So like when people donate to us, we're kind of putting a mix of KPI and
multiplier. Because we have a multiplier, what you're tranching it and splitting the multiplier differently for people.
Yeah. So for the first $1 million, so we're doing this thing for advisors and basically anyone who puts their face on our website, they get a 3x multiplier if they donate before June 7th, right? And advisors also get 5,000, and builders get they get 5,000 for free, which I need to put in here.
Let me just make sure it's fine, but you also are going to have to at some point do the bookkeeping analysis to make sure that everything adds up, because we do need to make sure, like, obviously it makes sense to provide sort of bonuses and rewards and like make sure that the right people are being incentivized, but that does mean that when it comes time to do the hatch, all the numbers need to add up.
Exactly. Well, and this is what I'm running by you right now, because Jeff made a really nice spreadsheet, which doesn't have the newest numbers, but I think we can basically ballpark it right now. So in the end, because advisors get 3x, but only before June 7th, I find it very unlikely that they will break the 1 mil mark. But we can even put in a 1 mil cap for advisors on the 3x multiplier, and then after that is a 2x multiplier up to 1 million DAI, or before June 30th. And this June 30th thing is because I want to be able to say, hey, this isn't going to work out, and we're going to try something else. And basically, we would give back the money after June 30th.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense because it's a good safety valve so that people are not they're not feeling like. I think it's always good to have that kind of thing, because what you're saying is you're giving people a risk mitigation basically for free. You're saying, look, like, I'm going to mitigate the risk of the abject failure for you. We will at the very least, it's never a guarantee that everything will work out, but it's nice to be able to remove the immediate failure from the list of potential outcomes. Just like, you're just going to get your money back.
Yeah, exactly. And so what this says is that on the whitelist, for this 1 million DAI, it's going to be 2 to 3 million on the whitelist. So let's just say $3 million on the whitelist.
Right.
And then 1.5x multiplier up until 2.5 million DAI, which is our real target. Like, that's what we really want, is 2.5 million DAI. 2.5 mil, we can do everything we want to do. And this turns out into being 2.25 mil, so that's 5.25 mil total on the whitelist. And then the 1x multiplier until I want to just leave the cap at 4 mil. And this is still something to debate with the team, whether or not we don't want to raise that for other reasons, just like
I am
social reasons.
Debating with the team is fine. I think that I'm inclined to round it off at 5, but only because I like the idea that I would prefer for us to be set up in such a way that we actually do end up having more to put in the funding pool, because I think it'll be I definitely don't want the number to be big and scary, but I think 4 and 5 feel the same when we're going out to the public. I don't think there's a big feel difference in those caps, and the results of getting to 5 is that there's a bigger margin between what we're expecting to spend and that cap. And I would love to be able to put like $1 million in the funding pool to start. Like, I think that would just be amazing. And so I think that it's worth, my opinion is the worth making it 5, even if we internally budget exactly as we've budgeted today, with the intent to put like, you know, $1 to $2 million in the funding pool. But remember, the actual system that we want to have needs funds to allocate.
Yeah, no, exactly. I actually really like that idea. I had taken out the fact that we would put money into the bonding curve because there is a little bit of a legal
funding pool. This is very different.
Sorry, yeah, no, the funding and exactly, and but I will address that with
Talk to the team and think it through. But my feeling is that the byproduct of this work is that DAO, right? That community. And that community, we're not just asking, this isn't like, you know, it's not just the money to make the thing in in the instantiated sense. In a sense, think of it as a living organism. And you don't just want enough energy to give birth to the organism. You want the organism to have enough energy to live. And so extra money is not is like, I'm not adding to the cost of launching it. I'm trying to make sure that it's got blood pumping through it when it's born.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if we raise $2.5 million, then it's really easy to do that. If we raise less, if we raise 5 million, then it's like, yeah, 1 mil goes in the. That's fine by me.
And this is a cap, not like, you know, we're saying that what we're basically saying is our required raises to 5, our cap is twice that, and anything that's left over is going into the funding pool to fund all of the things that this is meant to fund. That we're not even saying, cool, we got more than we needed, we're going to waste it. We're saying every extra cent that we can save, we're going to be stoked to put into the funding pool.
Yeah. And okay, so then the next piece is that that makes that 2.5 million, right? And so if we do 3, this ends up being 7.75 million as the hatch max.
Yep.
Yeah, max. So of course, I don't imagine that we would hit that, but that ends up being really big.
Yeah.
And
the nice thing, though, remember that the hatch is the trick to the hatch. It doesn't actually figure out exactly what the bonding curve should be until you know the amount that you've raised. So it doesn't do the sort of what I'll call the paper gains for being in the hatch sale are a fixed multiplier, not a that we pre-specify, not something that increases in the amount that we raise, which helps us avoid the sort of, you know, the Ponzi thing. Because essentially, we're not saying every additional dollar raised during the hatch sale means more returns for the hatch sale participants. Don't get me wrong. Once it's launched, it will affect the way the curve is, like the way that the curve that actually instantiates. But we're not doing our pre-sale raise or our hatch sale raise with a Ponzi effect, because the paper multiplier for being in the hatch sale is constant. Do you see what I mean?
The paper multiplier is what?
It's constant. Constant. Remember, it's the number. It's the P naught, P1 over P naught. Doesn't care what the R is. The R naught. That's important because it means that the hatch sale does not have a Ponzi scheme in it. It's constant. Your paper returns the same for every dollar that goes in the hatch sale.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, the
up
curve
to the multiplier. I mean, like, but that's how much you get to invest, not how much.
But also, if more people put money in, or people put less money in, then the curve changes, and then once your tokens are actually released, the economics are a little bit different, right?
So, you know, we're not. The economics are different as a result of how much you raise, but what's not changing is the paper multiplier at the point of launch, which is generally the thing that people are going to be looking at. They're going to say, like, that's the thing where you say, for every die that you put into the hatch sale at launch, it will be a number of tokens whose face value on the bonding curve is, 2x or 3x, depending on what you picked. It won't be liquid, so you won't be able to sell it until it vests, but you are not giving the people who committed late, like the hatch sale is not going to have this property where the early committers to the hatch sale are going to necessarily be able to get larger returns than the other participants in the hatch sale. The hatch sale is a block, is what I'm basically saying is it's non-Ponzi in the sense that the hatch scale has a straight line in paper returns for all participants, rather than one of these multi-layer marketing things where someone gets in and then they just convince other people to join to make their multiplier go up.
Yeah. So then as long as you don't mind, I mean, there is just like, okay, how much money does token engineering need in the hatch?
So here's my question about that. Does it really matter where we set the hard cap in the token engineering commons? So we say there's a hatch sale. How much do we say? 7.75 mil is our hard cap.
We can just say 8.
Now, like most of these people who invested in this, I'm thinking there won't be a 1-for-1 donation or investment per donation. So some people just won't. Like, what if we raise 2 or 3 mil?
Yeah.
And it's an 8 mil cap. And then maybe, so I guess this is something Flo brought up today as well, because in the first round, every dollar is spoken for. If everyone invests every dollar that they donated into the common stack, then we've reached a hard cap. But if 3/4 of those people don't invest, then can you have a second round where people can invest more into the hatch sale?
I would say no. What do you think, Z?
My gut is also no. Let me think about it. We could potentially have a wild card bucket for ostensibly for contributors, for people who like participate. So here's my thought. We create a wild card bucket that is not necessarily big, but it's basically a way to get the right to invest in the hatch sale, even if you didn't cash in on the donations. And we can narratively focus this on people who contribute to the project. Because there's going to be people who contribute to the project in whatever way. So I just air quotes contribute, because there's a lot of ways to meaningfully contribute to a project. So if we create a wildcard bucket for contributing to the project, we can use that degree of freedom to potentially source a little bit more if we need to. But again, very much focus it on people who earned the right to be there ostensibly through whether it was contributing to narrative or contributing to building or whatever. We get to basically be non-exclusive, but we get to do it in a sort of exclusive way by just saying we reserve a wild card bucket for people who contribute later, because there's a period of time between the donations.
So we do have a plan of just saying blanket, like simple. Anybody who gets paid gets 15% of that pay on the whitelist, right?
That's fair.
Now that's not the wild card bucket. Like the wild card bucket, could be something like dishing points.
Yeah, and here I don't even want to worry yet about it. I'm just saying structurally, I think the way that we get around this problem is by essentially claiming from the very beginning that, hey, look, there's always going to be contributions that we don't know about, and we want to make sure that those people get an opportunity to participate. So we're going to reserve a wildcard bucket for people who really contribute to the project in some way that we didn't predict. And it's just wildcard for a reason. It doesn't have. It can be a number.
And the builders are experts on the common stack things, so that it goes along the same lines. But I think Jeff's major point is: will we allow people who have $1 million, who someone has $100,000 that they can contribute to the whitelist? The hatch reaches only 75% of the cap. Can they buy in more?
So what I'm saying is that I want to basically make that a discretionary policy, and I'm using this wild card as a way to do it as a discretionary policy. The answer is I don't know, and we could make a judgment call under the wild card principle. You see what I'm saying? I want to give.
I mean, that seems.
What?
I think it's so much simpler to just say no, because then it gets really it gets extra it's something we can always add later, right? Maybe not for the
but what I'm trying to say is that by calling out the wild card concept, we can decide later without looking like we went back on anything, without actually seeming like we changed anything. So it's no offense.
Wait, but how does this wild card? So we would just be able to say, oh yeah, also you, because you're an active advisor and you're not even an advisor.
No.
We would give you.
I'm not saying do it disingenuously. I'm saying that if it makes sense, it will be because they contributed in some way. I'm basically. I think the answer is no. The official answer is no. That there is a means of using a discretionary policy to say yes for someone who contributed in some way that's meaningful. I'm not saying we should say yes to anyone. I'm saying that our heuristic for determining whether to say yes will include like whether there's a meaningful way to associate them with the project.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of how we would implement this discretionary policy, you know? So,
right. And I think my point is that I'm trying to give us an ability to figure that out later. I'm saying it's not a full loophole. It's like a plug-in for, look, if we get to that point and we're sitting there and there's someone who like is going to do that, my heuristic would likely be something along the lines of, well, are they expert enough? Do we want this? And if the answer is yes, then the odds are that there's a reasonable way for us to say, hey, they contributed in some way, even if it was just advice. If they're not actually expert enough to pass that test, then we probably don't want it anyway. So we would say no, even with the discretionary policy.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to make a little bit of a way for us to do this reasonably without having to make more decisions now. The answer is no as a blanket statement, but there's sort of a plug there for if it can be passed through the wildcard policy because we can reasonably believe that their opinion is valuable and that we want them, we can find a way to say yes without changing our policy. But that doesn't mean we're going to say yes. It just means that we have an opportunity to say yes for people whose actual input to this would be valuable.
Okay, so I have another one for you. We are contemplating implementing a max cap of any individual ownership of the whitelist, right? So like, this whitelist has different addresses that each have a number. So like, we could say, if there's 8 million possible on the whitelist, no one can have, over 10%, which would be, what is that? 800,000.
That's a little bit hard to implement because you have to force the cap retroactively. You don't know. You don't want someone comes in and they're the first person.
To implement it, what we would do is we would keep track of everybody's the whitelist. And the money if someone has over 10%, we would count that as money we can't spend. And then at the end, we would straight up give it back to them.
Okay. So I would have to time. So the way that we would do this is we'd have to time box there is a time box, so that's not a problem. But if you put a time box around the donations, then what you're saying is that we essentially, and to be clear, like, almost can't spend, worry about what you can spend, but almost can't spend anything until the end of that box, because what you do is you take everything that everyone gave you. After the box ends, you can compute the distribution, and then you essentially have to do a calculation that says, what do I have to return to people such that no one is ahead of the max individual holdings?
Well, I would say that you can actually spend a lot of the money. It's just that if you can track to see, okay, this person put this much in the whitelist, and currently they own this percent.
The calculation that I just told you, you would essentially have to compute it continuously, and at every point in time, you would have to block off any dollar that could end up in that bucket. So at any moment, you would say, how would this get returned now? If now was the end, I can't spend that. And as time goes on, more of that would become available. But that means, just for example, that for the first person to be able to say, well, if no one can have more than 10%, just for easy numbers, the first person would have 100%, so 90% of it would be unspendable. If the second person came in, now it would be, say, 100, but you still can't have more than 10%, then it's 10% each. So, yeah, I mean,
the first person, we can't spend any of his money. Well, yeah, you're right. We can spend 10%.
Yeah,
no, we can't spend any of it.
Because we haven't reached the no return cap. We have to first. Yeah. So the gates would be first. You have to have 2 gates. One is the minimum, that because you can't spend anything until you're past the number where you'd say you would return all of it, and then you can start spending only the amount given the current raise, as if it were over and you did the 10% thing or the expert thing, and then as that. So I mean, like, we could make a curve that showed at any given time, given our pay-ins, what's spendable. It would be a little annoying, but I guess to your point, it's computable.
It really wouldn't be that hard. Like, it's because we'll be tracking everybody's donations anyway, and we'll be tracking the amount that they have that is theirs on the whitelist, and we can just use that whitelist number and correlate.
Doable. I'm just thinking of it from the perspective of it adds operational overhead in a way that I tend to try to avoid, but it's fine. It makes sense.
Well,
you're dynamically releasing just because you have layers of fundraising, but it makes sense. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just like.
But okay. So yes, like it's really what my doesn't matter. Should we even care if someone has 20% of the whitelist, right? Like, do we care?
I think that it makes sense to have one, but it should be really big. I would like to have a number that's extremely unlikely to be hit. So something like
I think 10 is pretty unlikely to be hit.
No, I agree with you, but I'm just saying, like, 20%, 10%, fine. I wouldn't go any lower than that. I want the thing that should be the number that we use as the max percentage you can have. It's fine if there is a number for that, but I'm just saying I think it should be something like 10%, 20%. Like, I don't want anybody to have 100. I don't want anyone to be 90. We don't want it to be 90% one whale and 10% someone else, even if that person is an expert. Like, I wouldn't even want me to have that much sway if I could, right? So. Well, I would say 20% is fine. That means that there's at least 5 unique, like, minds, and I'm not saying it's 5, but the point is, at 20%, you're saying that there's a minimum of 5 unique sort of brains, even if it's community level, like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's enough, in my opinion, to be good. It doesn't need to be no one can have more than 3%. It can be like 10 to 20%. That's 5 to 10 sort of unique, and obviously there's going to be a long tail. So, like, it's just, I think it's fine. I agree with you. I think it's good to have it as long as it's a really big number.
Okay, and okay, cool. And someone just joined us. Hey, what's up? Who is it?
Hey, that's Jonathan. Sorry, I was unmuted.
Yeah. Dude, I was holding out for you. Yes. Okay, that's amazing. Welcome to the party, man.
I have some visitors here, so I was a bit late.
No, it's perfect timing because I just got through. I saved all the stuff that I thought you'd care about for the end, so I haven't gone into any of it.
All right. Awesome.
So, yeah, so
the exciting stuff is still to come. I like that a lot. All right, let's go.
All the good stuff.
Jonathan stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I haven't even given Z like the general updates. So the big one is legal. Is that we can actually start talking about the token engineering commons, and we can. I mean, fuck, man, Bernd. Oh, this isn't working. Can you help me out? Bernd, I don't know how I don't know if he drugged these lawyers to agree to this, but he even got them to say that they can invest into the token engineering commons. Like, I can tell people that this is that we're selling an investment, and it's still not considered a SAFT. Now,
Yeah,
I'm a
that's
little.
good. I just want to make the comment, Griff, that it really doesn't matter what the lawyer says, right? And what you convince lawyers to say, right? It really matters what the law says. But if they're good lawyers, then we have to trust them. Yeah.
They're good lawyers, and I'm still like saying I'm not going to say any of that. I think it's a little too ballsy for me. I think we're going to try to make sure that there is a crystal clear distinction between the common stack and the token engineering commons. There are things that he got the lawyers to agree to that they say we can do, and I can't believe I'm the conservative one. Okay, I'm really confused right now, but I'm gonna go with it, and like we'll keep like we could actually put builder money into the token engineering commons, but I think that's really blurs the line there, and there's some other things, but we're gonna make sure that we are building the common stack and going to lead the community construction of the token engineering commons and kind of do that shift.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, one question I would always recommend is to really ask why. And like if Baron says, the lawyer say we can do that, and then I would just like try to understand how they argue that, and then if that makes sense, and then you can also double check it with some other people, So that's how typically I do it. I've seen lots of lawyers say lots of things, but I mean, I think I trust Baron. Baron is a great guy, so he'll ask the hard questions.
Yeah, the why is that the donation doesn't guarantee any tokens. So we're not actually selling future tokens. People are donating. They get on this whitelist. Now, in my mind, that whitelist is almost the same technical thing as the token. But that is neither here nor there.
It's not, because it's
not transferable.
You donate, and then if you put $0 into the token engineering commons hatch sale, you get 0 tokens. So that actually makes a lot of sense, because you're not being given anything. You're not being given even a right to. The weird thing is that you're getting a right to get a right to do something. So it's the fact that you don't actually get a token, you get a right to participate in the process that would get you tokens, seems like it's the insulator.
Yeah, exactly.
But an option would also be a security, right? And that also just gives you the right to execute the option if you want to, isn't it? Wouldn't that be?
Well, but you actually have in an option, you have a something of value to exercise on, right? So here you still have to buy that thing of value. Like technically, we're not giving them anything of value other than an option to buy stock. So is it an option where you have nothing in return? Like there's literally no, because what they're saying is the donations is not. It's not even a transaction, really.
It's not even a purchase of an option. So I guess what Jonathan's saying is it the purchase of an option? Because if it's a purchase of an option, then we start to get into securities territory. If it's a donation, and what we'll say is, and again, this is nuanced, but if it's a donation, like almost think Kickstarter style, you give a donation, and then then as long as everything works out, you get sort of a donator gets a sort of reward of some kind, and that reward is an option. Because essentially, this is the nuanced boundary. And I'm not saying I know the right or wrong answer, but the question comes down to whether it's a donation and the donation just happens, and the fact that you're given an option later is just sort of, cool, versus whether you're buying an option.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say that we are squarely in gray area here, for sure. I think that it's gray. I think it's gray enough that we can go for it. And
I agree. I mean, it's important to understand that which black and white we're gray between. So what I'm saying is that I'm describing the two, like we are between interpretation sort of best case interpretation is, hey, you just gave us a donation, you're not entitled to anything, and we decided, and as we made this whitelist, and this just is sort of the consequence of what we built, which is just the donation, no big deal. That's the white side. And the sort of black side of the spectrum is you bought an option. And we're squarely in the gray area between those two things. I'm just being clear about what the thing we're gray between is.
Yeah, and
I love that.
And either way, I think that will be okay. But we're going to go for it. And I want to make sure that these lawyers, if they say that they're going to lose, their faces are going to be on our website before I fully trust that. So I want them to be advisors.
Yeah.
You're putting
exactly.
Hey, Griff. Sorry, Z. Okay, you go.
I'm done. I was just saying that gives them.
No, go ahead, John.
I just had a stupid remark. I said we should put in the budget a recovery fund in case Bernd and Jeff and Lorelei go to jail. That when they come out, that they have a really nice life.
well, that's
no, I'm just kidding.
That's why I want the lawyers' faces on the website, because you can't go. It's very hard to go to jail for a financial crime where you had advice from a lawyer. So
cool. All right, cool. But that's good. But overall, that's good news. That's a good update.
Huge news. Narrative pitch. So narrative pitch is complete legal stuff, but it's going well. Abby, me, and Jeff are on it, and I'll go into some of the content that we're producing if you guys want to look at it. And then Max and Chris and Bernd are working on the website. It's up. It's horrible. Don't worry about it.
Is the carrot still on? Is the carrot still on?
Oh yeah, right in the middle. But we're gonna get rid of it.
I talked to the other Max earlier today briefly, and obviously there's some ongoing effort to make sure that we have efforts to do a swap out in the not too distant future. But yeah, it's a process.
Yeah, we are. He said that we'll have a logo on Monday and we'll have a call on Tuesday.
Yep.
So
they're great. So
yeah, it sounds
like super fucking thrilled, because normally he has to fight for good research, and we have all this narrative material and all these discussions, and he and his interns just went through all of it to digest the identity of the common stack from all of the artifacts of the common stack. And he was telling me, he's this is amazing, we got to actually know it from absorbing this stuff, because normally they have to work really hard to draw out of someone their identity in order to do their jobs well. And because we had so much artifact of who we are, they were able to do their jobs much better. It's basically what he said.
Which is funny, because I feel like we don't have hardly anything out there, but I'm glad that.
So we're talking about, they actually want the raw. So there's a big difference between distilled material and raw material. Raw material, like the discussions and all of the shit that we've produced, is indicative of who we are. That's a good input to a process for making external material, as opposed to overly refined material, which has actually been so curated that it's harder to see who you really are, because all you can see is what you said about yourself. So what you can think about it as, it's like training a machine learning algorithm. You want lots of data, even if it's a little bit all over the place, instead of just 1 or 2, 3 points that are good.
Yeah. Well, website is coming along. We got a form. We got a basic form up, and we're going to add a couple things to the form. The general strategy is to people have to fill out one form, and then we either approve, and then with that, then we'll send them if they're approved or rejected, basically, and then they can put
the KYC stage, or
No, the first form isn't KYC. First form is just
it's just, are you qualified to be in this?
Yeah, exactly. And then the next form is KYC and details on how to do it. And that's the point of the website, of course, and that will be the primary focus. And then that first form, applied to give us money. This is, by the way, I hope this is going to become a major part of our narrative, which has been very successful for Moloch, is just like, yo, do you want to be part of the cool kids? Because we're building something amazing over here, and it's only for experts. Like, you know, I don't know if Vitalik should really be a part of this. I guess so. I guess his governance gets him in. So, okay, he can come in, you know? Like, that's the kind of attitude that we want to exude, right?
And not only exude,
so
you can build on that narrative if you do things like, for example, we take the Twitter now when we get there, right? And we do a thing where once a day we tweet a short thing that says, like, obviously with the person's permission, like, someone is going to be doing this and here's what they're an expert in. Just like little things that like make people good and also make other people feel in awe. And you can do things like, and it doesn't have, this is just an example, it doesn't have to be that, but like highlighting a random person that maybe people don't know or think of and go, this person because of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good call. I think we have a lot of opportunity to really capitalize off of this like cool group narrative, and Twitter is this place to do it. So, and picking up and giving it, you know, it's one of those things where like praising people for really doing something that they did well is like so powerful. It's like everybody wins on that, and everyone loves it.
Yeah, it's absolutely a positive sum game because you get credit and you get like social credit for doing that, and they get social credit for doing that. So you get a net sum transaction. Yeah.
So I think that I assume that we will get a community organizer, and that will be directed for sure. But okay, and then we have Chris, and I assume hopefully Chris will have the time and the energy to make these things happen. So, but that's a website. Advisors. So we still only have Eden, Jordy, and Simon. Things have been kind of on pause while we really buckle down the narrative. Jorge and Luis, I've been giving them kind of like a pause because I just didn't have the good content to pass them. I feel like I have stuff now, or I had some things, and then it was like, oh, now we can talk token engineering commons. So that's what they're waiting on, and I haven't really approached anyone else because now there's too many people to approach.
Trent, right? You have a meeting on the book with Trent though, right?
Yes, Trent is the 23rd, and I already approached Hudson Jameson, but softly. And we haven't scheduled anything. He was at the airport when I talked to him on Skype, actually, of all things. And then, but yeah, so there's a few people in the works, but I want to do a
I don't want to overdo it either. I wasn't trying to, when we were talking, I wasn't trying to overdo it, but I was also highlighting the fact that the main thing I was highlighting is that in practice, it's going to be hard to know which of those people are going to be actively engaged. So while I think there's going to be a smaller pool that are effective advisors, the heuristic that I use is always to be like a safety factor over the number, like the actual advisors that you want, accounting for the fact that it's hard to know in advance which ones are really going to help you.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing: we are going to I'm literally going to tell them, hey, you have to commit to giving us an hour of your time a month, or we will remove you.
And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying that even with those commitments, it's going to churn a little bit. Like you're only going to follow through on that. So I'm basically saying I agree with you completely. I was just advocating for, at this stage, imagining that we're going to get about a third efficiency on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I see it is if they don't follow through on that, then I would be willing to cut their
And I'm not saying, I'm not even, that's fine. I'm not talking about the logistics of that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I'm just talking about in terms of the recruiting phase. I would prefer to literally ask and recruit everyone who we would think is qualified to do it, even if that ends up being 25 people, and then trimming in 3 months when we say, okay, cool, who actually followed through on their commitment to advise us and actually make those the people that we are actually our advisors. But I'm not preemptively limiting, okay, we have to stop because I'd rather recruit and then prune than stop recruiting, as long as the people that you recruited are the people who you want to be advisors. Don't recruit people you don't want. Just recognize that one is bringing them all in, and then in 3 months go, okay, who actually did it?
Yeah. Okay.
Can I quickly ask, just because I need to drop off at some point, is this an open-ended call, or is there sort of a time and a couple of topics that we still want to go through?
Yes, there is an agenda that I sent to you on WhatsApp in this Google Doc, and so
the agenda. If I derailed it a little bit, that was just from our conversation in Telegram.
So if I could have, have like 50 minutes or so, that'd be great. Otherwise, I get a bit into trouble here with my visitors.
For sure. So this is basically the end of the updates is that advisors. I'm going to do a Lumio poll, and I'm going to kind of crowdsource this a little bit, and I want to limit it to like, well, I'm going to ask people how many advisors we should have. But I'm probably going to limit it to 10. I really don't want more than 10 advisors. It also just looks cluttered and unfocused. Too many. But we'll see. Maybe if everyone else thinks we should have 1 million, then I'll go with the crew.
And also, like, my point was not to put up 25 advisors on the website. I'm just trying to make sure that we like account for the churn or account for the failure to follow through in this discussion.
For sure. So, and then the other update is Spawnette, Will, and Pavle are working on the POC implementation, and the links are in this document. It's not. I don't think it's worth looking at or anything. I just want to make sure that you guys know that we're probably going to have a working front end and general, like, some kind of smart contracts that people can play with and at least look at. But we'll make sure that people know that everything's going to be completely redesigned and that this is really just a proof of concept. But yeah, that's happening. And then now I have some real things that I need your feedback on, at least a little bit, Jonathan. The biggest one being the money side of like how much money things will cost on CAD and design. I assume that you have a hand in that, right?
See, I mean, in the end, I got those numbers from Z, and we discussed these, right? So, do these numbers that you put down in the spreadsheets, do they differ from that budget we had in this other crazy document in this Word document?
Well, yes and no, right? So they don't at the 2.5 million mark, but they do later, because like the question is, what happens if we only spend $1 million? If we only raise $1 million?
Yeah.
If we only raise $1 million, I still want to do it, but we just have to half-ass it. So we have to figure out what can we do with what funds, and also even at the $2.5 million mark, even though I have the numbers, the question is like, what does that equal, right? And I think that's more of a Z thing than you.
I think quickly. So I think one key question is, what's the minimum that we need to open source CAD, right? Because if we raise 1 million and then it's like 187,000, then potentially it could be the better route for us to sort of go to the Ethereum Community Fund and raise 500K for it or something like that, right? So like I'm just thinking, if we Zargam, if we have a minimum, and you said 250 or 300 at some point that we want in order to open source CAD, is that still
so
what you're thinking?
Too. So when we talk about money to open source CAD, the biggest distinction for me is, are we thinking about this in terms of like the spend on the the ongoing sort of initiating of the CAD, building out more of the education, the tutorial, the stuff that we need to do to make it usable by this community, versus whether and that's forward-looking work that costs us money, versus recouping some of the cost of producing it, which is I mean, honestly, is higher than these numbers anyway. That's fine because it was subsidized for a reason. But like when I look at, if I were to do backward accounting from the last year and just like what we spent purely on CAD creation, and like the numbers are much bigger than these, which is fine with me. I'm not trying to recoup it, but I'm kind of in my head trying to think through like what are we specifically saying? How are we allocating these funds in our heads, and even narratively, like what they're for. So there's a big difference between sort of, hey, you know, block science just, you know, we spent a year doing this hardcore sort of research and development and produced a product completely bootstrapped, and we're going to just give it away for free essentially to the open source community. And that is one piece. And so there's a question, okay, like, you know, I can think of it as recouping some percentage of the cost that we subsidize, versus also very important, the fact that this isn't automatic. Like we're finding a very high need for documentation and education and demos, and a lot of that is still very much forward work that I'm essentially trying to have budget for to continue to pay the people who are doing that. And so those are two different concepts. And I want to, in order to reason about numbers, I need to sort of, one of them is reasoned against the cost of doing the work in the future, and the other is reasoned as percent of spent recouped. And so in my head, I want to think about them split that way, even if we're not going to sort of put it on this sheet that way. And one of my questions is, how do you think?
I would be happy to say, yeah, you guys get some number of dollars just to open source it, you know, like period, end of story. And then also, you know, there's also these other things that you want to do with it, and, you know, improve its documentation, maybe make a basic token module or something like that, you know, create some
material. But I also want to be careful, and while we have Jonathan, I want to point this out. I am very seriously considering making software things that we can sell and license that are a lot more locked up. So things that are like software, like not CAD, like CAD itself. I want to open source the tools for anyone to do good design work, but from the level of using CAD to make models and then wrap those models in software so that you just have to go to a cloud service and be able to run experiments, like all the way up to sort of product level, you know, like flight simulators. I would like to be able to monetize as actual product for, you know, making money from people who aren't even necessarily participating in the community, who just want to click, see some answers, which is very different from a token engineer who we want to train and enable to do their own models and to mature the space. So we want to reward the people who are doing the work and want to learn and do a good job. At the same time, block science wants to be in a position to monetize people who say, fuck that, I just want the answer. You see what I mean?
But that's not direct. Is that directly related to this discussion about these numbers, though?
It's not directly related. I'm just being like, I'm just being transparent about the fact that like, CAD is not the same as giving away everything we ever produce on top of CAD. You see what I mean?
Got it. No, let me just inject my thoughts around it. So I think so at some point we had the discussion what's sort of the minimum that we want in order to like open sources, and I think what was in the back of our heads was what did we spend on it, and then, you know, I don't know if was it a percentage. I don't know if we have like straight figures what we spent on it. It's probably difficult to calculate, but I remember this was about 250 or 300K or something around that. I don't know. It's in the word
Well, so the thing is, if you want to lower bound what it costs to build, you can just start with Josh's salary for a year. And that's a lower bound because he worked on almost nothing.
Let's just say it's 250K. Let's just say it's 250K. The other thing, I think that the other thing is just what I had in my mind. What's I think will be great for block science if there's just a chunk of money that just comes in directly when that money comes in, right? So sort of a little bit like a liquidation preference kind of equivalent, right? So because in some way it was sort of a fast way to also inject some money into block science. So as long as we have some, I don't know, 100K or 150K that really goes directly back without much like overhead and bureaucracy and milestones, I think that would be something that I had in mind.
The way that I would think about this, Jonathan, is then we can do something like, whatever number is as the for open sourcing CAD, which would be the thing that would be essentially instantaneous, and then a drip that's associated with funding the continued education and model and like basically the stuff that we want to do to continue to build out tutorials and demos and do training and everything that we need to do to elevate this community. That's ongoing cost, but that can be sort of drippish because we actually just want it to cover the cost of paying the people who are doing all of that education work. So
in my mind, how it works in my mind is that there is quite a significant amount of work that we put into designing, the token bonding curve and structuring this whole project basically. And that is sort of, I think, the junk that I would have thought would be paid directly to block science. Then all of the open sourcing can be milestone based, and all of the sort of education is something a little bit more flexible, right? If we raise more, then we can allocate more to that and do more education and so on. And if it's less, then it's less. I think that's sort of the flexible component. The milestone component is the open sourcing of CAD, and sort of the amount of work that we already put into like structuring this project, like designing the token bonding curve, simulating it, and so forth. I think that's the amount of money that pays for work that's already done, basically, without any milestones.
So I agree with you. I think that makes sense. So we've sort of partitioned.
Okay, so I want to bring this a little more concrete. So let's say that we raise $1 million. And how would $200,000 would not be enough to to get you guys open source, right?
No, I think that's a fine number for open sourcing. I'll do that. Okay, I mean, obviously, it's still relatively. Put it this way, we would like it to be more, but I want to open source it, so I will say yes to that.
Okay, so, and all it does, what does it get? Like, all it does is open source? Or would you guys build any modules for it? Would you use some of that money to improve? Or would it just be open, CAD becomes open source, and that's it?
I think at 200, we're saying CAD
that's
just
the library.
The library just goes from being we turn the library out. And to be clear, there's going to be work associated with that no matter what, because it's not just going to open source it. We want people to use it. If we open source it, it's not in our interest not to work on documentation. It's not in our interest not to make it more usable. We will do it, but we're just not promising to do anything in particular, because that's the money to just open source it, and we'll just have to figure it out. As the number goes up, we're essentially allocating those funds to do, more specific things around using it or teaching it.
So what I give you a quick just as a to anchor this as well. So I spoke to QJ from the Ethereum Community Fund during Groningen and so forth, right? And I just told her about this project as well, right? And I discussed she asked me how much money you need to open source this, and I said, see, I mean, currently we're we're thinking about 300, 400, 500K, something like that, and she thought that was well within something reasonable, right? So I think 200K really is for open sourcing this, and what it will do for the community. I think it's not crazy.
Yeah, no, it's not crazy at all. It's not crazy at all. But we need to be able to write this down. That's why.
Yeah. I would say that's the open sourcing of the library. That is not creating, graduate level courses about system engineering and all of the stuff you need to actually use the thing.
Right, because
that would be sort of a variable.
Just to be clear, our user beta research is basically telling us that the tools not bottleneck. It's almost all education at this point. So our engineers are now doing what I call science fast as fuck. Meaning the things that in the time cycles that they can do token engineering on. Again, this is the simulations in science, not necessarily the modeling, which is still a long process. But learning to do the modeling is still very hard because most people just don't have the education, and it's different from development. It requires domain knowledge. It's hard. And so what we're finding is that 80 to 90% of the inability to use CAD has almost nothing to do with CAD. So we want to get it out there, but a lot of our planning and effort is actually focusing on education because of this.
Yeah.
That's the part of our user research. So I'm just kind of giving you that knowledge.
I'm just trying to go back to this other 2-pager. What do we call this? I just wanted to say, I think we wrote this down already, no, didn't we?
The value.
Yes, but things. I need more detail. I need more detail.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so we're gonna have to just go over it again. And now let's say that we raise 1.5 million, and okay, so like what I have now. Okay, let me just say I'm working in this document, so you can, and I moved what I'm working in to the top, and I'll put it in Jitsi. Or no, I'll send it to you directly, and I'll put it in Jitsi.
So what I want to do is, in order to not have this run on all night, but knowing that you need concrete numbers, what I'm gonna do is say, let's make sure that we get the minimum numbers right, and then we can imagine that the numbers increase sublinearly, so you don't have to just perfectly scale it. Like the number can get as a smaller percentage of the total raise as you move to the right.
It does.
But I'd rather anchor it by talking about the mins, just to keep the dimensionality of the discussion low. I have a feeling we're going to have to push some of it out to a follow-up with Jonathan. I'll follow up with him to talk about our minimum numbers, and you can follow up with him to sort of flesh out the details that you need for the narrative around that. But I think the key here is to focus on minimums.
I have something really easy that we can chew on with ideas already, and I think if we just try to stay focused, we can get through it in 5 minutes.
Okay,
cool. Let's go.
So if you can go to that document that I just posted a link to.
I'm there.
So now I have, if we raise over 1 million, gotcha guys, you just get 250K. What do you know? So I already have been playing with this math, and this is kind of how it's working out. And I'm going to save the bonding curve for later. If we raise over, so I deleted some things. I thought you'd be able to do more with 250, but honestly, I think we just like kind of just leave everything here, right? Now, if we raise 1.5 mil, then you can get 20%, right, of that, which is, I'm sorry, I forget.
So in which cell are you? You're in D3. Is that your cursor there?
No. Yeah, I'm not on a cell. I'm in a Google Doc.
It's check the
okay.
Jitsi chat window and click the link, Jonathan.
And I also sent it to you in WhatsApp.
I'm on the phone.
I'm in both of them. But
I'm on it.
Yeah. I sent it on.
Okay, cool. All right.
So now if you scroll down to the next one, if we raise over 1.5 mil, you guys will get 300K. Now for that extra 100K, what do you guys think you would want to do? Like I put some ideas here. We can probably delete them.
I actually, so I would say add a developer is good. I think I would say like, yeah, it's definitely, I think the first thing has to do with adding a developer, and in fact adding sort of let's see, basic token network module. The hard thing about adding the modules is that actually we are doing a lot of that stuff, but there's a lot of the open questions remain around how the IP around the engineering designs are going to work. So we want to basically have some open designs, but actually a lot of those are in the CAD. They're like showing up in the CAD demos repo anyway. So maybe the idea would be, Jonathan, I'm trying to make sure that designs that we release in the open source community aren't in direct competition with our effort. I want to facilitate people being able to do their own designs. I'm a little bit worried about taking things that there's sort of a zero-sumness associated with taking sort of some of the designs that we've spent a lot of time refining and open sourcing them. We're going to do some of that because they're going to be the templates, the reference models, but I'm not.
So what I'm thinking is let's let's keep this discussion to the structure, and then what you'll get from Z and me is like just a very refined like formulation of these points or suggestion. I think it's hard to do this on the fly within 5 minutes, frankly, because we have some other dependency there, so we need to double check how we what we commit.
The key is that as stakeholders, what we're trying to do is empower it so that there's a big whole community of token engineers, but we have to be a little bit careful not to cannibalize our actual ways of making money, because then we won't exist to lead that community.
Yeah, of course.
With funds. So for us,
Of course.
if we think of CAD as a tool for designing engines, we own designs of engines, so we can't give away all of our engine designs, but we can think about which ones are good to seed the community with.
Yeah, exactly. And so, hopefully all of these things can be win-wins, and at least you can see the structure that I'm working with here. The exact numbers, I hope that we can, ballpark and I think what I have here, open sourcing CAD. If we raise $2.5 million, you can get 420 for open sourcing it, and if we raise 3 million, it's 450. Not a whole lot of buffer, but we can make that bigger too. Raise.
This sounds fine structurally. Basically, to me, the overall thing is at the base level, we're open sourcing the package, and then the more that we're getting, the more we can add developers, the more that we can support, the more that we can add education. These are the things that are coming. Like, basically, the more money there is, the more devs we can hire into it, the more support we can provide, and the more education built material we can build. In a nutshell,
okay.
That's the answer. And so we can extend against that narrative, but it's essentially a parameterization starting at the minimum is just here's the package, and the more money's there, the easier it's going to be to add devs and add support and add education.
Yeah, and so I need to finalize these things, all of this stuff in the next week-ish. Not like finalize, not final, but at least kind of like a pretty good.
You need to lay in a lot more detail than what I just said, but that's the gist of it.
Z, so on Monday we have our weekly. So how about until then I take a swag at this and then we finalize it on Monday evening, and then I think that would be good for your timeline. And then
that's amazing for my timeline. Okay,
yeah.
But there's there's one more thing, which is the token bonding curve, and understanding the cost of doing the design work for the token bonding curve, and also what we get for that. Now, I hope that the module that we would actually be building a module for token bond. So what I have, my thought. Let me throw my thoughts there really quick. So basically. For designing the token bonding curve, we would actually build a full-on module for CAD, and if we only raise 1 million, that module would be only for exactly what we do. And if we raise more, then it could be generalized for token bonding curves, and we would have a open source token bonding curve machine, module, CAD machine.
The key here is that we get this and we make the CAD model of the bonding curve, the family of bonding curves, that CAD model would be one of the open source ones, precisely because it was built for the commons, which means the commons would own that model, that CAD model.
Okay.
That's
and we would just be giving away. Okay, perfect. And then how much do you? So there's the building the module, and then there's actually using the module to design the curve, and then there's working with the implementing team to make sure that it goes. And I have the basic numbers for that, but I'm curious, so
this
what are the minimums so that it could be done poorly, for $1 million, we could do it.
Not necessarily poorly, but the reality is that this is a project and it's consistent with a lot of our work. In order to operate at cost, we're usually in the $30K a month rate, and then this is pretty close to cost to operate with a team, which is usually 3 people. It's the engineer and the sort of project management and the sort of whatever. But if you think of it as 30K a month, where we've already done several months of work on it, then you can quickly sort of understand what it looks like. I have a feeling that we're gonna probably end up doing this almost no matter what. But it goes back to the problem of, how the difference between compensating us for it and us sort of trying to figure out how to get it done as best we can, given the fact that we're chasing money from elsewhere, right? So if you think of this as being, that's our sort of cost.
30K a month, but then I don't know how long it takes to build a module.
So in this case, think of it as maybe 5, but assuming that at least one of the months worth of work has already been done in the past, maybe 2 even. So it's something like 5 months where we've already done the first 2 with the bonding curve, at least as far as the Token Engineering Commons is concerned. The stuff that I've been doing with you guys, which is the component level specification, which is an input to the CAD model. So like Abby's article contains what would normally be the information in the second month's deliverable. If this were a 5-month project, so we'll use this as an example, then the initial requirements gathering, system understanding, and like baseline assessment would go from general fuzzy narrative to well-defined business and system requirements. Then the second month would probably output something pretty close to what Abby's article is, which was me having done all of the actual derivations and sort of initial simulations to verify that those derivations have the properties intended. And then the next month would be the part where we would start building on the CAD model. And then over the next 3 months, we would get a CAD model up and running. We would start tuning it and running experiments to refine it. And then ultimately, like at the end of that 3rd month, produce sort of a report with sort of sensitivity analysis and various kinds of like basically use of the CAD model to refine and improve the, help tune and choose parameters. So if you could say that, then that's a $150,000 project.
So and is that, so like, what's the bare minimum that, so it sounds like 3 months is the minimum that it would take?
Yeah, so maybe I would parameterize it like this. 2 months of its sunk cost, so like however you want to think about it. 3 months of work forward that we would actually have to allocate and pay for. So getting at least 90 would be great, because it would mean that we would actually allocate engineering resources as if we were getting paid and not have to stress out about how we're going to get it done. So it sounds like this is a 90 to 150, and that's not to generate margin. That's just to function. And if anything,
and I'm happy, but here's the thing: you guys need to generate some margin, and I have you allocated for designing the token bonding curve at 160 minimum.
I'm just being transparent. Yeah, so I'm being transparent. I'm saying sort of, 90 is we managed to get it done. 150 is probably what I would prefer if I was just saying here's what I would ask for, and then everything beyond that is margin, which is great because we need the margin if we want to be able to be better leaders in this community. So everything that is beyond that 150 is giving us breathing room so that we can focus energy on being leaders in this community. That's the way that I would think about it.
Okay, then okay, and for that we would get there would be an open source module that anyone could use.
Yeah. And so the resulting CAD model would go into a public repo. It would be CAD token bonding curves. Fork it whenever you want.
Cool.
Yeah, and
I have to drop off, unfortunately. I'll follow up with Z and I'll get in touch next week. Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. Happy weekend.
Hey, thanks, buddy. And then the other piece is the continuing to work with the implementer, and if we say that it takes 3 months to actually design the system, when can the implementers actually start working on their side?
So the implementers can generally start as early as when we have the the spec close to, like, pretty close to after we get to the point we're at. Because remember, the thing that's specified in, say, Abby's article is actually the mechanism specification. And even if you change those functions, the software architecture doesn't change much, right? The software architecture, the smart contract software architecture of the bonding curve is pretty much set. The only thing that you potentially change are the sort of, if you change the function at all, that's still only like 1 point of calculation. And then if you change the parameters, that's actually even easier, because you're not even changing the calculations, you're changing a number, a variable in them. So that's not to say that the system's design is done, but there's a certain parallelism that's possible, because what you're actually engineering isn't the software architecture, it's the decision logic. And the decision logic is a specific slot in the software architecture that can be swapped without breaking the software architecture. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that works. That's great. So basically, you can almost do the design and implementation in parallel in this circumstance.
Yes, especially if
because we have enough
well-informed leaders on the implementation side. So it will struggle if the implementers are not. If the implementers are strong, then we would have a sync once a week where you'd say, here's our progress on implementation, here's our progress on engineering, questions, ask each other, whatever, and proceed. It's not, you don't want those things to get too far away from each other, because if they don't jive, then you've wasted a lot of effort.
Yeah, and so then the other thing that I want to just bring up again, or is the strategy here, is that if we only raise $1 million, if we raise less than $1.5 million, then we actually can't do the conviction voting. We just can't. Like, it doesn't fit. And we can't do give it. So we would have a token bonding curve feeding into a normal DAO that just sends money out. Okay. And it's kind of,
it's just not. I said, it still works. It's just a lot less impressive.
Yeah, it's fucking lame. But I don't think we'll get to that point, right? And I do think that we'll at least raise $1.5 million, which would give us a token bonding curve feeding into Giveth. But conviction voting takes a lot of an
ideal.
There's no.
Ideally, the risk.
We could do.
Ideally, the risk mitigation here from a big picture, though, is suppose it happens and we build just the bonding curve and connect it to Giveth. We would still try to get people to put money into Giveth or into this system and spend it to build the conviction voting system to add to it. Exactly. I think it's an important part of this narrative that basically is very organic, in the sense that, if we have to start small, that doesn't stop us from having our long-term objectives achieved, because this is a self-realizing system that if it works and we get part, we can use the part that we got out to fund the next part, so it can grow. And I think that that's a nice aspect of this narrative that, again, it's really helpful to have, even if it's subconscious, to really make people feel de-risked, where you're like, hey, it's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay because.
Yeah, no, and I think even with even if we only raise $1.5 million, I think we can build a very basic conviction voting. Very basic.
I'm actually not worried about it, because I feel very. So the funny thing is, I'm also, like, as much as I would love to spend more and more time testing and refining, I actually feel very good about things like conviction voting, because I designed the principles based on actual engineering work that I did. Even like the precursors to conviction voting are in my PhD thesis. So we're not talking about ideas that are just out of your ass. Even though I'm cross-applying them, I already have more intuition about how they really behave than most of the shit that people pull out of their asses in crypto, because literally the algorithm that's embedded, it was called a discounted integral priorities, was what I called it in my thesis, and it was used for packet routing decisions in a particular network routing problem. But the algorithm itself was used on research on a coordinated decision problem in a network in a paper that got published in an academic setting and is in my thesis. So like my understanding of what it does and doesn't do as an algorithm is already orders of magnitude higher than most of the things that people propose. So I'm less scared about not being able to get it to work. So if we have to do a simplified version of it, I can still help figure out what that simplified version is and still have pretty good intuition about how it will behave. You see what I mean?
Exactly. We could do it without going full on CAD and like We just have like, here's the basics, implement it, normal tokens, you know, it's gonna suck, it's not gonna be user friendly. I mean, that's basically,
like if we don't get it, the less money we get, the longer it will take for this to grow into the thing we want it to be.
Exactly. And so, but then if we get $2 million, we can basically do everything we want. But it doesn't, it's not pretty, but we can do everything we want. And then that's where I start to question this like strategy of how do we, well, I guess we know we can't start till we hit $1 million anyway. But then when we hit $1 million, I'm kind of hoping that you guys can focus on CAD first and execute that milestone, right? And just like open source CAD and data while we're still in the raise. And then we can figure out.
Yeah. I really want to be like, I really love in August at the token engineering event to be like having a big, like even having already done some work to make it, like I would really like this to happen fast. Like my team has been told that we're working already, all of our road mapping is working under the assumption that we need to be ready to release CAD by July and maybe August, like with some slide. Yeah. And that's not like the commitment, that's the doing it. That's the actually here you go. So it's the follow through, not the commitment that I'm talking about. Like we can make the commitment as soon as this is sorted, but we can actually follow through on that commitment also very fast because I have all of my road mapping being done as if all of this works out. So we're not going to say, okay, cool, congratulations. Well, 6-12 months from now, we're literally going to be able to say, and here's the release date, and it's not very far away.
Yeah, and I mean it shouldn't be so hard to flip a switch and say, no, this is now in an open repo, right? And then you have
that's not the hard part. The hard part is that you make a repo open and it's not like accessible. So like it's one thing to make it open source. It's another thing to have it be meaningfully open source.
Of course. So that you have some documentation and right? And
we've already, like, we could flip a switch and open source it today based on that logic. The work that we're running now is cleaning up APIs, cleaning up documentation. We're preparing for a quality open source release. We're not just preparing for a flip a switch. It's, hey, we open sourced it because it's an open repo.
Yeah. I mean, but then if you want, so the thing is, we can't give you the cash until you open source it, but what you can do is you can just open source it and then continue to work on it in the open source way to make it better, and it's just like
we can figure it out. I'm happy to figure that out when you're at a point when like very simply, like we are doing almost all of our work right now is focused on education and documentation so that the open sourcing is quality. We can flip a switch and open source it in that sense basically whenever. And if it ends up being the right choice for us to do what I'll call a soft release where we just turn the repo open and a sort of, like a restaurant pre-opening before its big release. Like we can do we could plan a soft release where we turn the repo open and then like a big sort of formal ta-da release where all the documentation and everything and all the education is there a month or two later. But it'll already be open in the sense that anyone who knows can go get it, and the community members can even potentially help get ready for the big release. But I think that there's at least an idea here that we want to have.
I want to steer this back to because I don't want to waste any of the time. But like, that's amazing. That's perfect. Okay, that's beyond what I expected. But what I'm curious about is I really think that the longer we delay token bonding curves, the better, because the apiary app gets built and all these things.
I'm not necessarily going to argue with you there. I think a lot of that is the kind of thing that's hard to know for sure until we have when we having not raised enough money to know exactly what's in and out of scope. It's hard to make a good development roadmap.
No, exactly.
Development roadmap. Right. So exactly. I can't really argue with you until we get a sense of where we're going to be on the spectrum. It's actually kind of hard to decide, what to do in what order with what resources, because we actually haven't figured out exactly what we're going to try to do, because we don't know how much money we're going to have to do it.
No, 100%. And this is the thing, that if it does look pretty clear that we will raise $2 million, I really want to do conviction voting first and put all of our efforts into building a module for that, which I think will be really complicated and way more expensive than token bonding curves.
It will be
because we haven't done as much work on it.
So from my perspective, you can still pretty much assume that per project that you want a full block science team on, assume that you have to pay $30K a month for the resources per project per month is basically where what makes things not a nightmare for me. That's where it's just okay, let me make sure I get the right people on it. We'll do the right thing, and we're not gonna have to worry about we're not gonna be stretching to figure out how to get it done. If it's $30K per month per project, which means that as long as governance is in scope and that's our focus, the conviction voting thing, I will put a regular block science engineering team on that project. To your point, it's more expensive, but because it takes longer. So not because I'm going to allocate a different tile engineering team to it. It's just that a properly staffed engineering team will take longer to deliver it because there's just more work to do. Yeah.
And so will they use $30K a month, and you think it'd take 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, let's budget it at 6. I'd rather budget it well and then finish it faster.
Yeah, that sounds good. So 180K basically.
Yeah.
On the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, and then okay, and then is there because this is the challenge for me. It's okay, there's got to be something that's okay, we can do a quick and dirty version of design, or we can do maximum badass design, right? Is there a variant there, and how wide is that variant?
Let me think about it. So for the conviction voting, the variant, I would go so far as to say, much like with the bonding curve, I think about halfway through you could start the implementation process. And then, but it's hard for me to say that you can do much that's quick and dirty, because going back to the fact that these are the first evers. Quick and dirty in a lot of engineering senses means just copying the closest thing that's robust and using it and adapting it in an environment where there's no.
Yeah. Well, let me give you some hints. Maybe okay, we're not going to document it at all. It's going to be an open source module, but we're not going to make it easy for people.
That's
how much
because remember that this isn't a software development exercise. So the thing that I will grant you that there's lower quality communication and higher quality communication, but because it's a modeling exercise and it's basically an engineering design exercise, there's a lot of quote documentation that is actually part of the design process itself, in the sense that you can't cut it out, because it's just it's we think of things like equations, for example, as documentation, but in the case of engineering design, they're not documentation, they're actually part of the work. So you don't cut them out, you have to do them. You might not document them as well, you might not give as much explanation of how and why those equations work, but you wouldn't be able to skip the derivations. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, of course, but maybe you could add on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to argue. I'm just trying to think. I don't know. Given I'm thinking that so I tend to take a very MVP approach even with the engineering design. So like when we go to robust, rigorous token engineering, we're not saying go to the extreme of waterfall. We're saying do proper agile engineering work, which is agile hierarchically, meaning that you have to do an adaptive MVP, improve and expand upon the design, and then you can do sort of an adaptive MVP, improve upon the implementation. So like we're not actually going between, we're not jumping to something that is like not sort of agile and iterative. You see what I mean? We're still doing a very agile and iterative process. We're just doing an agile and iterative process on the pre-process, on the engineering design, and it's got a partial overlap with an agile iterative process on the implementation. So I'm not sure that there's as much to pull out of it as you might think, only because even though it's a slower process, because it's a slower time phase iteration, it is actually still an iterative process, not a waterfall one. So it's not like you
and whether it's pull out or add on top, I'm cool with, obviously I'd want the like minimum and the maximum, because like as we as we aggregate up this time scale, I want to be able to tell people, or this monetary scale, like, yeah, if we raise 2 million, yeah, we can design the DAO and we can kind of build it, okay. But if we raise 2.5 million, then oh baby, Lambo.
So the way to do this, if I were you, and I realize this is going to cost someone's effort to do, is to make the ideal roadmap and then filter it down. Like, so basically we have our budgeting, which is our minimum. Our lower bound on this is defined by our budgeting, and our upper bound is defined by our ideal roadmap. And then you can essentially make a bunch of copies of the roadmap and delete things out based on the levels. And so that you have essentially, right?
That's basically what I did. Right. I started with the 2.5 mil and I went down to 1 mil, and it was a very productive exercise actually. But like it's still like marketing. There's also the marketing angle of it. It's like if someone only cares about the token bonding curve, then like what do we give them if we raise the extra thing? I want to give them something. I want to give every kind of section some little gift, and maybe it's on the implementation side. Maybe it's not on the design side. Maybe the design side is the design side. And
every bucket has something different in every like uptick.
Not necessarily, like definitely not. Let me say straight up no, right? In the first 3 or 4 rounds, no, because like if we add in, like I add in giveth in the second round in 1.5. I add in conviction voting full on at the 2 million mark. But then after, and so everything can kind of stay the same. But then after that, I'm out of big buckets to load. Other than legal, I kind of have like a legal bucket. I kind of just, I want to be able to say, oh yeah, if we raise 3 million, then we can do this.
I think I have an idea. What if in the higher buckets we start adding things that are sort of operational in nature, which again we would need or want to do anyway, but we'd have to wait for the funds to do them. I'm talking about like sort of dashboarding and like basically transparency stuff. So like suppose the thing exists in the full fidelity that we want, but we haven't actually specified the things that are like what I would call operational analytics for the community, where you could just go to a site and see, hey, look how many tokens are locked against these different things in there. And like basically all 3 modules, this whole DAO has a whole lot going on in it. And so you can imagine basically building some analytics that essentially show the status of the DAO, like, how many addresses and how much flow on the bonding curve and how much, massive preference is being broadcast. A lot of these things where we're doing a lot of analytics in the design, we've made no commitments to port those analytics over into externally facing things. And I would say that that's actually relatively low-hanging fruit. It's still time and effort, and it costs money. But because we've done all this rigorous token engineering work, we have the precursors to a lot of that. We already know what the health KPIs are. We already know all that stuff because we had to figure out what they were in order to design it properly. But no one has actually committed to taking those same knowledge and turning it into visibility on the end state. And I think that's a big ticket item.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. I can add analytics to it, and I'm making a note there.
I think that's your last. I think that's your last tier big ticket item. I think that you put that at the end because that's the thing where I think it's a big carrot for people, because anyone who's really enthusiastic about this will probably, and if anyone who's enthusiastic about any part will likely be enthusiastic about being able to see it in some fidelity on the living thing. And so you put that, but you put that at the, get everything done right first, and then conditioned on getting past that, the second, the things after that, the last big ticket item is building out the visibility across the board.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, and let me think. I feel like that's most of what I need. Oh, I guess I didn't go into common stack. Oh, so we have an FAQ. Damn it! I wanted to tell this to Jonathan, but so we have an FAQ. We have intro slides. We have terms and conditions. No need to discuss them, but they're there if you ever want to look at them. Yeah, I guess that's it. I guess we covered it.
I think this has been super productive. I hope that's helpful. I mean, I think we worked through the things that I think are sort of me specific, which for me was very much dealing with the parameters issues around the launch. I think we have to briefly summarize from the very beginning, we talked about being able to express two scales of focus. One is system level architecture with a zoom in on the bonding curve in the hatch. And so there's a low level of detail, but like a high narrative focus on the way that the parts interact and the holistic biomimetic nature of the DAO that we're describing, and the modularity of the components and their ability to get reused or swapped by others is a big piece of narrative. But then to make it concrete, we step into the bonding curve specifically, the hatch sale specifically, numbers and expectations around participation that can come from the analysis that we already did, so that when we get concrete, we're not actually undermining our message about rigor because we've actually already done that work. And then we're saying like, wow, if you loved all this rigorous work, we're going to do that for the whole rest of this design if you back us. Yeah.
No, exactly. And I think that it might even be faster. Like, the thing I worry about is that I'm sort of seeing that the investors could potentially be incentivized to give us less money, because then we would actually deploy something a lot faster. Conviction voting takes a lot of time. And so then that makes me think, should we just
back
raise?
to what I was saying about not waiting on I don't think that we should give them that incentive. I think that we should make a roadmap that does actually release things in an order so that we don't want it. We want it to be slower, not faster, if they give us less money, which means that we want to make us a thing that makes them feel like the more money they give us, the more we're working on concurrently. And the less money they give us, the more we have to bootstrap ourselves, like build something and then use the money from what we build, and so on and so forth. It's like series versus parallel. So if they back us big, we're doing this work that we've mapped out much more in parallel, and it moves faster. If they give us less, one, we're more bottlenecked by future fundraising, and two, we have to work much more in series. And so they should feel it like it's slower as a result of giving us less money.
Do you feel like you could do conviction voting and token bonding curve modules at the same time?
But I would have to staff it as two projects. Like, I work on multiple projects. Like, we work on several.
Of course. But, you already have. So like, you go from the projects you have now and then add two projects right away.
Let me explain to you part of the way that I've planned my bandwidth allocation. So I have resources that are in the wings, in the sense that one example is there's a PhD control engineer who worked on contracts who worked for Dapper Lab as a contractor that I hired for them. And I finished that project, and he's going to be a free agent. I'm not hiring him currently because I don't have work for him. If this goes off, I could either hire him or I could contract him to work with my team because he's already worked with my team for 6 months.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, part of the reason why this would be great if we raise a lot of money is because if you do that and it's committed for a long time, I go hire him. If it's in the middle ground, I contract him. If it's at the extremely low end, I can't even afford to add him to my team. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly. Okay, well, it's nice to hear that you can do it concurrently. Would you imagine that we could launch, I think we could launch the token bonding curve with the basic conviction voting DAO, and it would, and get it working. It would take me time to get Giveth working on a side chain. It will take everything time, but yeah, 5 months, 6 months. Yeah, I think that should be able to fly. If I have funding and I can pay people, which would be a miracle, right?
That's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, actually, we're really good at what we do. Part of our biggest problem is that we're always fucking financially stressed, which always reduces our effectiveness. So like when you go and successfully raise money and I can pay the people that I want to pay instead of running around essentially using charisma to convince smart people to work on shit, which is really time consuming. It's effective. And it's a great seed for having staff, but you take those same people and you go back to them and go, hey, we got an awesome project. Like, I'm glad that you kind of did, a few hours a week with me for the last couple months because you were excited. Hey, now I have a project and I can pay you. Like, that's a huge transition because it lowers the overhead, at least for me personally, because then I can hire someone and I ask them to do a thing that I know they can do instead of having to micromanage their enthusiasm levels just to keep them working.
Yeah. No, for sure. Dude, it's the story of my life. How do you think the hackathon happened?
But I think you and I are very similar in the fact that we have both accomplished certain things with resources that we couldn't pay.
Yeah, no kidding. So my girlfriend's gonna kill me, but I'm gonna keep going.
To quickly touch on that because it was the beginning, I wanted to make sure it didn't get lost.
Yeah, and then for Giveth, do you imagine that there will be any kind of design needed on the escrow side? Not really, right?
Integration points, not the design of the core. So remember, in engineering, you have to. There's always this integration testing challenge because integration points are weak points. So it's not that I think that we need to do anything particular to Giveth. I think it's obviously the great part about Giveth is that it's a existing structure that's got some real world. It's gotten its chance to get beat up a little bit and learn from and improve, which is always a benefit. So it's not really so much about Giveth as it is about the integration points.
Oh yeah, and I just want to make sure, that's all implementation though, right? There's no design work that you guys need to do or anything really that.
There's gonna be I think, and we can talk about it later, but I think it'll make sense to have a CAD model of the whole system, which is different from the CAD models of the components. We haven't really scoped for that. I'm not sure when and to what extent to undertake it because normally I would kind of step into that only after we've done more work on the parts. So I imagine it being like conviction voting CAD, bonding curve CAD, and then if we do a CAD of the whole token engineering commons, it will be a little less granular about the bonding curve potentially and a little less granular about the conviction voting, but it would sort of zoom out and look at the sort of the whole system from the level that we would account for the functionality of both of those parts and Giveth and the flow of funds sort of through the bonding curve and into the funding pool and into milestones and back around into the bonding curve. Like that meta model would have to account for the Giveth functionality, but I view that as late stage. And in fact, ideally, if we're doing that, we'll just do that. I'm not necessarily going to budget for it, but it's actually I take that back. It's actually closely related to what I said about analytics, because what I would do to do high quality analytics is to build that CAD model and then fit it with data. So the way that I would prefer to do analytics here for the whole DAO would be to CAD model the whole DAO and fit it with data. And that's how we would show people the health and the state of the DAO.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can pull that, and I also think we can budget for it because it's one of these. It's another one of these things that's like, oh, we can do that on top. We can do this on top, and I need those things.
So I'm saying you can say that, but if it's in when I add analytics, we can think of that CAD model, the one of the whole system, as being part of that analytics bucket. Because the way we would approach analytics would make a whole DAO CAD model, and then basically wire it into data feeds, so that we would essentially be fitting the DAO CAD model with the data from the DAO. So you would be able to see how the DAO was doing, not just in a like statistics sense, but in a systemic sort of in an engineering way. Like that's how you like your power plants. You don't just take the statistics of the power plant. You have a model of the power plant and the data from the power plant to see how the power plant is doing. That's the way that we would do analytics for this kind of system. And that would mean its deliverables included a CAD model of the whole DAO and the data pipelining to fit that model with the real data.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that would be sexy to add in. And I have this thing called post-launch maintenance, which I kind of see this. Yeah.
Because to do that, we would have to see how it was doing in order to take care of it.
Yeah, I would imagine that we would, at least coming out of this conversation, I'm seeing this idea of we launch something with like a basic support of like a basic conviction voting DAO that maybe it's like not even fully simulated and totally designed, but we have like something going and we launch with that, and then we could upgrade as we finish the designs. Would you say that would make sense?
Fair. And part of that is because, the guys who were working on the conviction voting were doing some things to try to extend the design that haven't been tested. So, for example, both positive and negative voting. So the work that I've done in the past did not have a notion of voting -1. And I haven't done the analysis to validate that. And so my version of this would be like, okay, well, if we just go ahead with the simplest version that I originally described, which has the accumulators, the positive signaling only, and trigger functions that are basically proportional or like super proportional, basically that they explode as you ask for larger percentages of the funding pool, I think that's pretty straightforward and pretty robust, and I would be pretty comfortable with starting from there as long as it was upgradable. Without a lot of risk being incurred. But anytime someone wants to add complexity, I'm like, okay, but how are we going to test that?
Yeah, and I would also say that on the implementation side, I want to do some crazy shit on conviction voting, like using untested token models and just to make the user experience so much better on the base layer. So like, and then there's also a lot of work that can be done, like because I imagine that we'll go with Aragon. It depends on the quotes. Like, the way I see us doing this is like how you build a power plant. That's the only thing I know how to do.
We're
right?
on the
so
page.
like,
it's
like we work on the designs and then we go for quotes from vendors. And I can name 10 people that would be willing to build this.
You can only do this if you follow an engineering practice. Otherwise, you can't fucking spec what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. The entire department that does formal engineering design produces specs, and then you take it to get bidded by vendors.
Yeah, and so we put it out to vendors and we say, hey, will you build this? Will you build that? And then, so like for the first, we don't necessarily need to have a bunch of engineers on other than design engineers, we don't need to have.
Yeah. We need to have at least some. So what you need on your design teams are at least some experienced implementers, at least as validators or advisors. But you don't need the implementation staff. You need the implementation expertise, which is much smaller.
Yeah.
Like, you have Jordy as an advisor already basically covers that because it means that is implementable.
Spawnnet is a superstar. Like he's he's no Jordy, of course, but like he's there.
My point is that we have it covered in the sense that in an design phase, it's not ignorant of the implementation, but it doesn't require the implementors that you want to bid it out to. It requires enough expertise that you're guaranteed that someone can build it. It's can build it, not you understand.
Yeah, exactly. And so we can kind of go with this model, and we can say, hey, we're gonna work with you and build it, but we need a quick and dirty conviction voting, and so that we can launch it in the same time frame, because I think we'll be able to implement the token bonding curve surprisingly fast.
We can do so. Here's what I'm gonna say: if we're sacrificing on the depth. The depth, but not on the core concept, we can go with pure vanilla conviction voting, which is very close already structurally to something I'm published on. So is the less that we deviate, the more that we apply rather than change, the more comfortable I am saying the quick and dirty version is don't fucking deviate from my base specification. If you don't deviate very far from that, because lots of people are, you see what I mean? Like with the conviction voting, and I'm saying,
yeah, I mean, when you say deviate, though, do you mean deviate from the log functions?
No. We can change those. So what I'm talking about is property level. So like I guess, how would I think about it? The log functions, we can't directly implement because we're going to have to approximate log, period. That's fine. Like we're not, because log is whatever. I'm not going to go down that road right now. What I'm saying is that if I'm in a position to say no to people's suggestions based on how far it deviates from the things that I already know, I'm more comfortable. Because right now we have a large community and we want people to feel involved. What I noticed about the hackathon work on the conviction voting and just even the article writing is that a lot of people have a lot of ideas. And I don't want to discourage that. But the more new ideas that want to be thought about and considered, the more work we would have to do in, say, CAD to tune down to the best thing. The closer you stay to the algorithm variations that are in my prior research, the more confidently I can tell you what they will behave like, the more comfortable I am saying that's fine for an MVP and we'll do more research before we upgrade it. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But that means that it puts me in a position of like what I would say an uncharacteristically high level of authority, because I'm basically going to say yes or no to things based on nothing other than my own authority. Because and I don't want that to be the main paradigm. I would prefer it to be take everybody's ideas and use CAD and find the best ones, right? Because that's our very inclusive, very scientific approach. And so what I'm actually saying is that the more you fast track conviction voting, the more I'm going to expect to be the authority de facto without giving people the right to say, but what about? Because I'm not basing it on new engineering work. I'm basing it off of old engineering work.
Well, and this is kind of the nice thing about the engineering firm with contractors, right? That relationship is already kind of it's already that way. Yeah, of course there's feedback, but
this is almost more of a community management question that I'm talking about now. So when we're basically what I'm saying is the more we fast track conviction voting, there adds just a little bit of community management effort, because I think a lot of people are really excited about it and we're going to have a lot of opinions. And what we're going to end up having to do is manage expectations that if we fast track it, it's not open for discussion. You see what I mean?
Yeah, of course. And that's, but like the thing is, okay, we'll discuss it after you, like if we raise $3 million, it's like, we'll discuss it after you build the simple one. Okay. Build the MVP, and then we'll discuss these ideas.
And to be clear, like, I would make sure that I wrote a spec and I would iterate with somebody. Like I might have a sit down with, Spawnnet or Jordy to talk about the approximation algorithms, because I know that, again, this is not uncommon in robotics. There are going to be computational limitations. There are methods for taking an algorithm and addressing them. We will do those steps. But what we would be doing is taking something that is positive signaling only, this simple integrator that I already defined, discounted integrator that I already defined, and a trigger function that is based on a few basic properties that have to do with how fast it blows up as a result of trying to claim similar to the bonding curve, we just end up making a really sharp curve that basically explodes if you try to demand more than a certain amount of the funding pool. That way it becomes like, probabilistically impossible to claim large fractions. And if you somehow manage to swing that much support, then fine, you can have that much funds. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'm still holding out faith. I haven't even done the research I need to do. I'm still holding out faith, though, that Viper will solve some problems for us, and because it's Python, it's instead of Solidity JavaScript.
It's not going to solve the problems that you think it's going to solve, because there's still this question of, like, even in robotics, you have to understand the difference between your MATLAB code and your compiled C. So that gap doesn't go away. You might manage it differently, but the gap is fundamental. One is the onboard computation, and one is the theoretical computation. But this is part of the reason why I have confidence. It's because that's actually not a new problem. You have theory math, you have numerical simulations, and then you have onboard computation, and they step down. The numerical analysis in something like Python or MATLAB is an intermediate step between theory and like onboard computation. And one of the reasons you need that intermediate step is because you can reason about some things as you go from math to simulations, and you can reason about other things as you go from simulations to onboard computation. And we will need to manage both of those steps. But we know how to manage both of those steps because both of those steps exist in robotics. You see what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mean, at least the only thing, Viper, at least you can divide, and it doesn't like freak out so much.
Better. It doesn't. What I'm trying to say is, the challenge is fundamental. It's not a tool-based challenge.
Yeah.
So it could be made easier. Certainly, Viper might make this process easier, but it doesn't alleviate that step, because that step is intrinsic. It's not a function of the tools.
Yeah. Okay. Well, dude, man, I should probably let you go. I had a really fun time on this call. I think things are looking really promising. I really hope that we can meet this timeline. And I really can't believe we haven't started raising money yet, man. I'm really disappointed by it. So
no, don't be upset, because you got a positive outcome and you had to refactor your narrative. That's a good reason to have a slight shift. As long as you get back on schedule the moment that we've corrected for that, positive perturbation, respond, proceed.
Yeah. But yeah, we're on pace, and at least I feel really. I mean, dude, to be able to tell people, hey, you're buying into Token Engineering Commons, or you're buying into this, will get you the ability to buy into this. You can actually do math to see what your return is going to be on paper. And we're going to make sure that your KPI on unlocking tokens is this long, and Like,
you like that?
People feel pretty good about it.
You like the double half-life solution?
Dude, the double half-life solution saves my ass. Like, we literally, Jeff was talking to Flo the other day, and he's like, I don't know about this because I don't know when I can unlock my tokens. Like, it seems like I don't know. And it's like, okay, well,
magic is clutch. Just being like, what are the requirements? I got math for that.
Yeah, exactly, dude. I mean, it's so nice. Like, when did you come up with that?
While we were talking about it.
Today?
No, I mean, like I said while we were talking about it, because the thing is that my first language is mathematics. You just described the problem to me. I just described it back to you in math. Like, it's very hard. Like, I do this all the time, though. So, like, I don't.
So it wasn't something. It wasn't something.
I've had a similar problem before, but the better way to think about it is you described it to me, and then I described it back to you in math.
Yeah, so it wasn't thought of, like, it wasn't discussed somewhere else.
Designed that mathematical approach in response to what you said you wanted it to behave like.
Yeah, no, I mean, and what's funny is you didn't even let me get to fully describe the problem.
No, I figured out what you were describing. It made sense. You just started to describe something about the real world, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You should do that.
Yeah, exactly. Half-life with time. And I think the half-life is the right answer too. You know, it's a nice slow decay, right? Now, how those half-lives work together, that'll be fun. And implementing
it parameterized, like everyone can intuitively understand what that means, even though it gives us room to figure out what it should be.
And implementing in Solidity, real fun. So, but it doesn't have to be. It can be simple.
I actually, I've done a little bit of work with, not with combining half-lives, but in general, actually, it's just like addition, subtraction, and multiplication. It's actually remarkably easy.
Like radioactive decay, modeling that.
So you don't have to do the closed. You don't need to do the closed form. You can do the iterative. You say, what's the amount? How much has released? And you're basically multiplying. Only thing you need to do is keep the percentage, the fixed point math. So like you're gonna have percentages times quantities, but they can be iterative because whenever you do a vest, you decrement the to be vested because it's vested. And so then the next percentage is a percentage of that which has not vested yet. These algorithms have iterative representations, which is, again, way better for robotics and smart contracts because they're computationally not low intensity. So this is actually part of the reason why that's a good design. It's not just because it feels intuitive, but because it has an iterative representation where you just decrement, you have total not yet vested, you vest some, it flows. So then you get exponential decay by then applying the same percent, the same half-life again, or the same percentage per period again. And half-life is just a normalization. So the period can be shorter. Yeah. So actually, this should be quite easy. As long as you are comfortable multiplying percentages times numbers, then it's not going to have, it shouldn't be a bottleneck on the implementation.
What happens when we get near the end? Like, the problem with half-life is that it doesn't get to zero, right?
If you don't have, if you have integers, eventually it just rounds off and it's done. So it's only with continuous. Well, no, seriously. So like, and you can once you acknowledge that, you can set the endpoint wherever you want. So you could say when it, you can just put an if the number is less than this, return the rest.
Yeah.
Okay. So like you don't have to do Zeno's paradox. You can have it be like, when the number, like literally you just say if the remaining is less than threshold, the next increment is all of the remaining, and you're done.
Okay, cool, man. I got a lot of work to do, and I think this was a great call. So we'll keep going. I think that we're almost to the point where we need a weekly check-in. I think I could.
If you're ready for that, let me know. I mean, obviously, like, I'll be honest, like, this is kind of a baby at this point. I like fucking really want this to happen.
Dude, it's happening. It's going to happen. And even if we don't raise the $1 million, like, which I find hard to believe, because I'm pretty sure everyone wants. So far, it's been very positive with anyone who has cash. And with the ether pump,
we're getting a little luck. Part of the reason we need to move fast is because we want to be able to close this on this spike where people are feeling a lot of positive sentiment.
Yeah, exactly. The universe, everything's conspiring in our favor, so we just got to push it. But yeah, man, I think it's looking good. And even if we don't raise the $1 million, we'll regroup and we'll just take a different strategy and we will build this. Like it's going to happen.
I'm with you. Cool. Well, thank you for staying up late. And
Yeah, good night, man.